So good afternoon to all. And welcome to the second webinar of the Re-Livestock project. This time our webinar is dealing with gender issues in livestock science. So it's from gender blind to gender aware in livestock science, practical insights from our Re-Livestock survey. Well, the general framework of this webinar is that, as in any human activity, we have to be careful of what roles are being assigned to gender, and it's quite important, particularly when we study farming systems, as genders play roles, and we have to take into account these different roles, the responsibilities, who does what, who take decisions, and if we don't take that into account, we will probably have misguiding results and recommendations. So that is the reason for integrating gender approach into a project that would be far away, apparently, from gender issues, but it is not, as livestock farming is a human affair, so it involves roles. And I have the pleasure to introduce you to our two speakers. We have Catherine Pfeifer. Catherine is the group leader in the Food System Science Department at FiBL. FiBL is the research institute of organic agriculture in Switzerland, and she leads the environmental modeling team in FiBL. She initiated and leads the Re-Livestock Gender Task Force, embedding gender perspectives across the project work and outputs. We have also Natalie Sell. Natalie is a student in Zurich University of Applied Sciences, and her master thesis, Gender Power in Livestock Decision Making, Evidence from European Case Studies, investigates how gender norms and formal roles shape differences in decision making of women and men livestock farmers. We have also here Ines Rivelli, is member of the coordination team of Re-Livestock, that is the National Research Council in Spain, particularly the research station in Granada. And I thank you, the three of you, for being with us and for explaining, first of all, a little bit what is the project, the Re-Livestock project, what is the Gender Task Force, why embedding livestock into such a research, and also to explain a study case on how this can be done easily in your research. Re-Livestock is a European research-funded project from the Horizon Europe program, and we have taken the opportunity of programming this webinar on 11 February of this year because today is the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, and also we are, during this year, 2026, in the International Year of Women Farmer that has been declared by the United Nations. Thank you very much. We will start with the program, and don't forget that questions and answers will be channeled through the questions and answers button that is just in the center, in the down part of your screen. So after the speeches, we will have some time where we can ask questions or make comments in the questions and answer button. And also, you can also comment through the chat. But please, if you want to do specific questions, do it through the questions and answer button. It will be easier for us. And nothing else to say from my side. Thank you, Catherine, Natalie, and Ines. I leave the word to Catherine.
Thank you very much. Let me see if I manage. Am I sharing the right screen now?
It's
yes.
Okay. It's okay.
Yes, it's okay. Give me a sec. Yeah, no. Okay, we'll do it this way. So yes, welcome everyone. So I'm Catherine Pfeifer, and I'm happy to take you through this webinar today. If I manage to change, well, exactly. So today, I think it is a very timely presentation because the year 2026 has been declared the International Year of the Women Farmer, and we're so happy that we can actually present results on gender in the beginning of this year. And this presentation is constructed as follow. We first, for those who don't know what Re-Livestock is, really quickly go through what is the Re-Livestock project, what is the gender task force in this project, how do we do gender mainstreaming, and we want to illustrate this with an example of a survey where we have worked on, and that will be done by Natalie sitting next to me. So in a nutshell, the Re-Livestock project is a EU-funded project with 12 million euros and 38 partners, a quite classical big livestock project that has three main objectives. One is about mobilizing adoption of innovative practices to reduce greenhouse gases and to increase the overall resilience of the livestock sector. It's, in my opinion, a very classical European Union project, you see, with many work packages. What makes this project quite special, I think it's a very livestock science-oriented project, where you see on the side here with the VP 2, 3, and 4 really working on genetics, on breedings, and on management, really livestock science, and that is combined then with some socioeconomic and some more food system-wide modeling as science, and accompanied with a roadmap for transition and a multi-actor stakeholder engagement. We work in 13 case studies with ruminants and pigs, and I won't list them all, but they will come back in the work that Natalie will present. What is interesting is that the innovations, or what we consider as innovative farmers, is a very broad range, covering very intensive to very extensive systems. Well, so we believe this is a quite classical European Union project. So what the hell is the Gender Task Force doing in that project? So the Gender Task Force is a group of people that are actually located as part of the management of the project. And you see, that's the 5 people you see on this slide. Why did we create the Gender Task Force? Well, it's because we wanted to have the objective to align with EU requirements that are quite strong on standards. But we defined our mission a bit broader than simply what is expected. So we don't just look at gender biases in the governance of the project. We do that. And we did, for example, a code of conduct. We developed activities during general assemblies to raise awareness of people about biases and try to look on how we communicate with each other. We also serve as contact point if somebody feels that something didn't go well or something needs to be addressed. People can contact us. This is the quite traditional part that usually the gender delegate does in a European Union project. But we expanded a little bit our understanding of what gender is in a European Union project, and we really tried to also look at the research itself we do and what's the role of gender in what we do. And that's what we call gender mainstreaming. So what is actually gender mainstreaming? That's a really good question. We see gender research as a continuum from gender blind, which means that the research is simply neutral. The research doesn't consider any gender role or relation or power structure, it's just neutral. Gender aware is a research that actually understands that there's differences between men and women and does collect some different data, but doesn't per se go further than that. Gender sensitive is really collecting different data, having gender disaggregated data, and also start looking at what's the role of power and access to resources for women. Gender responsive is a research that shapes the research design to interpret and have specific recommendation concerning to gender. And finally, gender transformative research is research that challenges and changes the structural driver of gender inequality. So when we talk about research, we all know, we are all researchers, that we all do our own research. And I'm sure that we don't want geneticians to do gender transformative research as much as we also don't want gender, like the other way around. So it's a science on its own. And I think what is called gender research covers this part of the spectrum. And this has specific, very good people we're happy to meet who do very good research. They mainly come from the sociological background, and it's an own science and a science on its own. The truth is, when we look at this graph, we see that between gender blind and what gender research does, there is space. This space. And this is what we refer to as gender mainstreaming, meaning making sure that the science we do include a gender dimension, but without competing with what gender research does, but just making sure we have our glasses on to see what's the role of gender in what we do. So when we look at Re-Livestock, most of the research we do is actually gender blind. Shall I tell you a secret? I think my own too. So all the work I do myself when I don't put a gender hat on is actually also gender blind. So I think I'm entitled to ask the question why and probably give an answer to that, because I know why my research is gender blind. Well, basically because we think gender is not relevant for our research question, and mainly because we don't ask the right questions, and especially we don't ask the right question at the right moment. So we worked with a kind of a catalog of questions you could ask to identify gender issues in research. And it goes from the whole process of research, which is from the question and the framing to the study design, to the data collection, data analysis, interpretation, conclusion, and impact and dissemination. I'm not going to go through this overcrowded slide. I just want to highlight 3 of them, these ones. First of all, I think the question of who is affected by the problem, and are there sex or gender-based differences when we of what we do, and who defined the research question and who will it impact, is something that covers all sciences, from a genetician to a breeder. They ask, for whom are we actually breeding? And it's very relevant, but however, when a European project has started, maybe it's a bit too late to ask that question. And that's probably why most of our research is gender blind. However, when we go back more in depth into the project, we also looked at, do we actually collect sex disaggregated data, and do we analyze it, and do we have dissemination plans that are gender inclusive? So what did the Gender Task Force do, and how did we do this mainstreaming? We did a couple of activities. First, we trained facilitators for our case studies to make sure that they keep that gender dimension in mind, and they organize their workshops in a manner that are inclusive. We also had discussions with the communication teams to look at what it means to be gender inclusive in our communication. But mainly we screened all the work that is done and checked if we collect gender disaggregated data. And to our astonishment, this was not always the case. And we were able to add that gender disaggregated data collection. And in one case, we actually even managed to go a step further and to enhance plant surveys to include some gender dimension. And basically what we want to demonstrate is, even when a European Union project has started, it is possible to still do gender mainstreaming, and it can be low cost. And the only thing it requires is to put on these gender glasses at the right moment of the project. And that's what we would like to demonstrate today. And so one day we actually put on the gender glasses on the right moment. And that was the moment where the team around Lawrence Smith and Nick developed the Re-Livestock tool. This is a sustainability assessment tool that has many questions. I don't know how many, but a lot. And so we really asked ourselves, how can we add a gender dimension to this tool without enhancing with the whole tool with many, many more questions? So we took on the challenge of saying, okay, what's the minimum we can do at zero cost to start looking at gender in this project? And we were allowed, and we want to thank that team for that openness, to add two questions. And one was, who is working on the farm actually? What's the gender and the position of each person working on the farm? And we also asked, who is taking decisions about livestock, and more particularly about who takes decision about what is fed to the livestock when an animal leaves the farm for selling, for slaughter, who decides about the market channel, and who decides when to call a vet. And we felt this could be a very good starting point to start investigating what's happening when we start including gender in existing surveys. And I have been very lucky to meet Natalie, who was willing to do her master's thesis on this data set. And she analyzed this data and is going to show you what we can learn from this data set and in more general about gender mainstreaming in European Union projects. And I hand over to her.
Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I think it also for me was a very interesting opportunity to put on this gender sensitive lens and analyze the data. Even though I was not involved at all in the data collection process, it was a great base to have that data available for my thesis. So here you see the main research question that guided my analysis. I explored gender, obviously, formal roles of power and decision-making in the context of European livestock farming. And Catherine has already given you some context on the data we worked with. So I used the data of 68 farms across 7 different European countries in my analysis. And as the table shows, there is substantial variation in terms of number of farms and in terms of farm workers that were assessed in each country. For example, here in Switzerland, Switzerland is one of the countries with the highest number of assessed farms, but on average, there's only 3 to 4 workers per farm, and almost 1 out of 2 workers is actually in a managerial position. Whereas in other countries like Sweden or Denmark, the number of assessed farms is much smaller, but there's more workers working on a farm, and the share of managers amongst workers is lower. So you already see there's a lot of variation, and this is going to influence my analysis later. This is why I want to point it out at this point. The data was collected, as Catherine already described, on a farm level, but also on a worker level. And this worker level data was particularly relevant in my context, as was mentioned. So the gender of the worker, their position on the farm, and the categories that they take decisions in. The Re-Livestock data is not representative, so we decided to pursue a deductive approach. That means that I identified 4 gender patterns that are well documented in existing research in European agriculture. And then I used those patterns to structure the data analysis of Re-Livestock data. So the 4 gender patterns, I wrote them out here on the slide. They are linked to the underrepresentation of women in on-farm power positions, to the effect of general national gender norms on that dynamic. They're linked also to decision-making performed by women and farm leaders, and lastly, to differences between women-led and men-led farms. Here is an overview of my methodological approach. So besides the 4 gender patterns that you just saw, obviously the data, my thesis is based also on Re-Livestock data and on the OECD data related to social institutions and gender. This is particularly important to put into context what was observed in Re-Livestock. So I used mostly descriptive statistics to visualize gender patterns that emerged from Re-Livestock data, and some inferential analysis to identify potential differences between women-led and men-led farms. We then discussed those quantitative findings in an online workshop with European experts in livestock production and/or agricultural social sciences. And this whole process together led to the formulation of the exploratory insights that I then detailed in my thesis. Now jumping to the first graph, this is those like following now are going to come the visualizations of the data I analyzed. Bear in mind that all those graphs show show Re-Livestock data, so they are not EU representative or anything. They are very specific to the case studies that were assessed in the Re-Livestock project. So the first pattern that I assessed was the underrepresentation of women in on-farm power position. And as you can see, this is very well reflected in the Re-Livestock data. So the graph shows the absolute numbers of women and men in different ownership and management positions. So both farm ownership and management relate to leadership, obviously. So I assessed those positions. And what is visible is that women are less than half as often in those reported power positions than men are. And if they do have a role of authority, it is more often shared authority like co-management or co-ownership. So you could say that maybe there are less women managers and owners because in general there are less women workers in the livestock sector, which is true because you can see in all countries that were assessed, the share of women workers overall is less than 50% of the workforce. But also in all countries, unless the UK, the share of women managers is even lower than the overall worker share. So, for example, in Sweden, this is very drastic. You can see a smaller percentage of women workers than men workers actually transition into managerial roles. So even though they are in the sector, they are not in management positions. The second pattern, which is linked to the overall gender norms in the specific countries, this was quite hard to assess. So the belief behind is that overall gender norms influence gender dynamics in more specific settings. And we believe that there is a relation between those gender norms that are present in a country and the specific agricultural gender patterns. So to analyze this in the Re-Livestock context, I referred, as mentioned before, to another data set that you may be familiar with when you're familiar a little bit with the gender topic, which is the OECD Social Institutions and Gender Index. The OECD calculates on a country level a score for laws and social norms that restrict women's rights, opportunities, and resources. And in comparison with Re-Livestock data, I used the OECD's score for restricted access to productive and financial resources for the specific countries and also two variables. The percentage of a country's population that agrees with the statement that men make better business executives than women do, and the overall share of women in management positions in the country. So when visualizing here the relation of those national gender norms with Re-Livestock women participation in leadership, so again in ownership and in management, in those two scatter plots, you can see that in general there is a negative trend. So in countries in which normative barriers are higher, the share of Re-Livestock women leaders is lower. At the same time, the outliers are quite extreme, and yeah, I wasn't able to do any robust statistical testing, particularly due to the small sample size and the variation in number of farms assessed between the different countries. So this gives us more like a general idea that yes, there must be a relation, but it's nothing more than a general trend. Now regarding decision making, I think this is the particularly interesting part, and this was possible due to the questions that were added to the surveys. So as mentioned before, those questions are related to whether a worker does or does not decide in each of those 5 decision categories that are linked to livestock management. So livestock feed, slaughter, marketing channels, livestock sales, and veterinary care. There's 2 dynamics on decision-making that I assessed. First, here on this slide, I did a comparison between men and women leaders in the same leadership category, and looked at the number of decision categories that they do report to participate in. As you can see in the left bar chart, there is no significant difference in number of decision categories that men and women leaders report to participate in. But what is visible also is that the median number of decision categories is lower for women co-managers and women owners compared to men in the same position. So even though it's not a significant difference, the median is lower for women leaders. When looking at each of the 5 decision categories individually, here on the right side graph, it becomes clear that women leaders in general report to not take decisions in some categories more often than men do, and that the decision category that women leaders participate in most frequently is veterinary care. So this is the bar on the very right, where women most often do take decisions in. On the next graph regarding decision-making still, I assessed the participation in decision categories on a farm level. So bear in mind, on the slide before, I compared generally men and women leaders according to their specific position, and now I compare women and men managers on a farm level. So first of all, I chose all farms where there's at least 1 man and 1 women manager, and I visualized and opposed the number of decision categories that the women managers and the men managers participated in respectively. On 12 out of 29 farms, the man manager took more decision than the women did, and the opposite actually occurred in only 3 cases. So I think here it's a quite clear trend, which is very interesting, that in cases of co-management between women and men farmers on the same farm, the man manager actually report to participate in more decision categories than the women managers do. This occurs quite often, so there's a trend where they seem to take more decisions. Now, regarding the last gender pattern I assessed, here the assumption was that farms that are led or co-led by women tend to be more diverse, smaller, and operate less intensely than farms that are led by men. So to look into this, I compared data now on a farm level, not on a worker level, but on a farm level. And I first divided all farms of the case studies into farms that were led by only men, which are 37 in total. So 37, more than half of the farms were led. All the managers were men. And then I filtered for the farms where there was at least 1 woman manager, which were 31 in total. And out of those 31, actually only 2 farms were purely women-led. So this also shows already that there's a bias there. So when comparing those man-led with women-led or women co-led farms, I discovered that there is one significant difference, and difference is in number of income sources. So on farms where there's at least 1 women manager, the number of income sources is significantly higher than on purely man-led farms, and this finding generally aligns very well with existing literature that describe women farmers often engaging in diversification activities. So it is a significant difference that we discovered, and it also seems to be in line with what other literature describes. For the other farm indicators, the differences were not significant, but the trends generally also align with agricultural research. For example, here on the right, you see that women tend to farm on smaller farms than men do. So the arable area is smaller on women-managed farms than on men-managed farms. Yeah, as mentioned before, all those quantitative findings I just shared with you were discussed with agricultural experts in an online workshop we organized, which was very insightful for me. I was quite grateful for the participation of those experts that were able to provide another angle on our findings. And I here just show very quickly some snippets of the comments that we received in the workshop. On one hand, the experts provided further contextual information. For example, what I shared before, that women tend to participate more often in decisions around veterinary care. They mentioned that this is very much linked to the gendered expectations of women being caretakers, and that in their experience, this often translates into women farmers being more often responsible for younger animals, or as we saw in our case, for animal health in general. On the other hand, the experts were also quite critical and questioned, for example, if the way in which the questions on ownership or management were asked represented the legal status correctly. So they gave some further perspective on the work that was done, and they highlighted that the analysis of power dynamics would also benefit from considering other intersectional variables like age or nationality, and that in general, those contextual factors play a very big role. So I won't go too much into detail on all the expert input, even though it was very interesting. And I think it's specifically relevant for designing future research. So all this information is included in my thesis, and yeah, for future survey design, I think there's a lot to take from the input that we got there. So considering all those findings, I would formulate my personal key takeaways as following. So there are some clear technical limitations that I lined out before, but I think it is generally very encouraging to see that those gender patterns that emerged were also visible in this small data set, and that they align to a large extent with dynamics that are described in existing literature. And so to me, this shows that gender-sensitive research can be meaningfully conducted also in smaller scope projects. What's particularly insightful, as I said, is the fact that despite the small data set, there is a significant difference in between women-led or co-led and man-led farms. So this difference is the number of income sources, with women-led farms showing significantly higher number of different income sources, which means that the presence of women managers on livestock farms can be linked directly to greater diversification of economic activities, and thereby also to the resilience of the farm business itself. Lastly, there is a number of possible next steps that became quite obvious also in the exchange with the experts. The results from this analysis I just shared with you, I think, could be considered as a very good entry point for dialogue around the importance of acknowledging and also further assessing gendered power relations in livestock systems here in Europe. The limitations that we discovered, or that I discovered and just shared with you, can serve as a base to inform and guide future intersectional gender research in European livestock farming. And yeah, there were some concrete examples of what directions future research could take. So, for example, a gendered value chain analysis, which would allow to specifically analyze gendered roles in livestock management in relation to innovation uptake and to farm sustainability. So, yeah, I think, for example, this value chain analysis would be also very much in line with the general focus on innovation of Re-Livestock. And I think this is all the important information that I was able to gather in the context of my thesis. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you for making the data available. It was very helpful I wouldn't have been able to do the project without the data that was collected. So I'm very grateful for being able to work with that, and also very grateful for Catherine for guiding me through the process. And yeah.
And all the experts who joined that workshop a couple of weeks before Christmas. I mean, we learned a lot, and I think some of the people who were in that workshops are even joining us today. So thank you for that too.
As well, yeah.
So we would probably move to questions if there are any. I'm not sure we are able to see them, so we'll be grateful.
Yes. So, yes, thank you very much, Catherine and Natalie. It has been very illustrative. It's a case study based on 68 farms, I think. But I think you have put there some messages and some reflections that are quite useful. As said by Catherine, this is now the turn of questions, comments, whatever you feel you want to say. Please express yourself through the question and answer button. And there's one, David says, thanks for the work done. Very nice to have a more precise picture of gender in livestock farms, in which have dissected very interesting aspects in terms of decision-making and type of farming systems. I would love to have this data presented at the next project consortium meeting to have an internal discussion and explore which future steps. And one question, have you seen any difference between ruminants, dairy, and beef and pig farms? Thank you again.
So thanks for the question. We looked into differences between farms and also this was something that the experts pointed out during the workshop, right? That there's a number of contextual factors that obviously play into that. I didn't further divide the farms to analyze the differences because already just dividing them into those two groups left me with a little over 30 farms per group A and group B. So just from a statistical viewpoint, it wouldn't have been possible to do statistical tests on even smaller subgroups. What I did do, I think we are still screen sharing, right?
Yeah, we're screen sharing. Oh, sorry. No.
So there's some more tests that I did in the groups in general, and this is very specific on the animals that were on the farms, but I did look into whether there was a dominant species. So just from a livestock unit perspective, I made a cut on between farms that had a dominant species. So in most cases that was beef, or where there was a more balanced share of different animals. And we saw that there was no difference here in women-led and man-led farms. So that's a little different angle than what you mentioned, but I did look at differences from an animal perspective, and there was no significant differences here, but this can also very much be linked to the small data set.
Mm-hmm.
There's two issues. One is that data set is really small sample, and so there's really limited things you can do. And there's another issue. We have a technical issue here, and we're going to be switched off in 5 minutes, so there's going to be a switch to another sound system. I'm sorry, I don't know how to stop this, but I'm going to look for this now. While we go to the next question.
Yes, there's a question by Corinne. Thank you very much, Catherine and Natalie, for sharing your findings. Natalie, is your master thesis published, and where can we find it?
I think it is still under revisions from my uni. So I did my thesis at ZHAW here in Switzerland, and I believe that they publish it in their internal system. So once that has gone up, I'm happy to share it.
Okay.
But all of this is very new, so I just defended that.
I will discuss and go after that, because depending on who is owning the data and if we can, we probably would make it or available. We need to check the rights on that, but if it's possible, we'll make it available through or the Re-Livestock webpage or through organic e-prints, or even both.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so when it is ready for us to publish in the Re-Livestock website and social media and so on, please inform us and we will do it. One more question by Christian Gossel. The farms included in the Re-Livestock are innovative, testing new technologies and approaches. Do you think that the gender balance in these innovative farms will be different from normal farms, or let's say normal farms? And this is something I wanted also to ask. I realized that apart from innovative, I think there were big farms. Is this a factor?
I can maybe quickly.
Well, no, you can't because Are you able to take the power?
So this is something we did to kind of get a feeling to how far off, let's say, we were with the Re-Livestock set.
Sorry.
So yes, what I show here is a comparison with Eurostat data. As you probably know, each European country collects agricultural data on tenant, on management share, and all of that. So here in blue, there is the women manager share in Eurostat livestock farms. You can see there's quite some differences from the Re-Livestock data. And in most cases, actually, the share of women managers was higher in Re-Livestock than was the case in Eurostat. So this hints towards the fact that there could be a bias in the data set where there is an overrepresentation of women managers in the sample just by comparison to Eurostat data.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. Alberto Mantino says, great work. After this initial evaluation, also thanks for the work carried out with the experts. Have you identified possible ways to improve the questionnaires? Are there specific aspects you would now like to add or explore in greater depth? If so, how do you suggest proceeding?
So there is. So yeah, definitely thank you for the question. And as Catherine said, thank you very much to the expert that made their comments. It was a lot of feedback we received and a lot to build up on. I think there's several ways forwards, right? There is the existing survey and there's potential to build on the survey that is there and to add more questions and also be a little bit clearer. So there were some questions in the survey, for example, on family ties and on age. But for example, the age question was not asked on a worker level, but it was rather asked on the main farmer level. So the question was, what's the age of the main farmer? And if there's two main farmers, please give like an average of the age. And obviously this kind of makes it impossible to look at age at a worker level. So there's potential to improve those questions also regarding family ties that were maybe like a little bit, didn't give a very clear answer. Then there is potential to add more questions on nationality, for example, or citizen status. This is very important from intersectional perspective. When we are looking at power, obviously gender is one big factor and all of those factors are intertwined, right? So if we want to paint a clearer picture, we need to look at those other factors that influence. And then one big point was on the potential to gather more insights on decision making. So now, as Catherine said, it was a great opportunity to add those 5 questions. And in the future, there could be more questions on decision making because
or different ones.
Because decision making definitely is a great indicator to measure empowerment or to measure power that is held by individuals. But now the questions we had were limited to livestock. And there was, for example, no distinction to the livestock type, right? For example, it could be the case that a women manager takes decisions on slaughtering for the chickens on the farm, but not for the cows. So there's a lot of potential to add more nuance and also to consider more long-term decisions on long-term investments and strategy. So yeah, definitely a lot of potential. It's detailed in my thesis, and I think it's a great opportunity that we gathered all this feedback, and it would be very helpful for future survey design.
Yeah, I think as the gender task force continues and in looking at surveys, I don't think there's going to be many other opportunities, but if that model goes on for other projects, I think there's really good lessons learned on if we can ask only 2 questions, additional questions to include gender, then maybe we wouldn't add the same ones, and we might want to work really with gender specialists or gender scientists who do this every day to figure out which are the 2 questions that are really worthwhile asking to get even more out of the data than what we had today.
Okay. Thanks. There's another comment by David Yanez. Would you suggest to take these results to each case study in Re-Livestock for internal discussion at the next round of workshops? And specifically for Catherine, no, Natalie officially invited to the next project meeting in Pisa.
Very good. Natalie, unfortunately, is leaving us officially today, but I will figure out if I can bring her to Pisa. I'll negotiate that with her before she leaves. Should we take this as internal discussion? I don't know what the answer is. I have not thought about it in this way yet. We need to think, the gender topic is also a topic that where people don't want to listen. I don't know if there is enough to learn for each case study, and I wouldn't want this workshop to end up with saying, oh, look, the Italians do worse than the Swedish, or the other way around. I need to think it over, what, if it's worth and in which format it is worth to bring it back to the case studies. I look at this as really as a learning, how do we do gender mainstreaming in a project like Re-Livestock, which is really, for me, one of the projects I've done that has most livestock science, and I really love seeing that and see what does it mean to bring gender there, and really see, and I think this is a really tremendously strong result we see today. Well, this project is about resilience, right? And wouldn't we have added that question to this questionnaire, we wouldn't know at the end of this project that actually resilience of the livestock systems depends on women. We wouldn't have seen that. And that is what it is to be gender blind or not, is having this additional information. And I think this is quite strong. And so more than really bring that to the case study, for me, this was an experiment, an experience to see what can we learn when we start putting on gender glasses. And I can only offer that I will think about it in how it makes sense to bring it back to the case studies. I think that's what I can promise for now, but I have no clear answer otherwise.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. And Natalie, I hope we will see you in Pisa next meeting. Then there's a comment and question by Nick Davison. Great talk and really important work. You showed that on the whole, male managers had more decision-making responsibilities than female managers. Could any of this be explained by differences in levels of modesty between genders? Example, female managers underplaying levels of responsibilities and numbers of roles, and male managers overplaying responsibilities?
I think this is the point where the interpretation starts and where the data gives some hints, but this is something probably that we cannot read from the data, right? So this is also a point where we can ask ourselves the question, is this a point that we want to follow up on, right? Is this something, for example, that can be discussed also with the farm workers in those specific cases? Because there's always the data point and then there's personal perception, right? and in general, gender dynamics are shaped by societal expectations and by norms that are ever present. And this is, I think, why also Catherine, I believe that it was so important to bring in the OECD social institutions and gender index, even though the comparison was a little bit difficult. But whenever we look at those gender dynamics, I think we need to consider those norms and not just be, oh, but this is a very specific dynamic on the farm because the woman feels like that and the man feels like that. All of this is shaped by the expectations, and I think it's a great way of approaching this topic, right? To be kind of to inquire further and to ask ourselves, like, why are those dynamics, and are they like the way how they are reported? Do they reflect reality correctly, and what is it that shapes those dynamics? So I think those are very good questions, and I think this is not something that we can answer from the data perspective solely, but I think, yeah, very important to ask those questions.
And I really think this has been one of the major critique we got. We're saying, well, when you say you are a manager, did you actually define what a manager is? Is that a manager by law, or is it do you feel being the manager? And this hasn't been clear. And these are type of things we've learned in these workshops that if we redo even with the same question, we need to be much clearer on what we mean, for example. And the other thing we hear a lot, what Natalie says, and I think we should really keep in mind, there is this border between gender mainstreaming and gender research. And if we start going into much more details on what Natalie suggests, which I think is really great, then we need to really be sure that we have gender specialists on board, because here is a group of people who find gender important, but in the gender mainstreaming, it's about scientists like all of us putting a gender glass on. However, if we go into these details and who perceives what, I think we really need to move from mainstreaming to gender research, which is beyond the scope of what we can do as part of this project, but it's definitely something we could consider for future projects. Anyway, I think we have a last question. Is that correct?
Yes, we have a couple of them.
Oh, a couple of them.
Yes, the first one is by Galina. Galina is the communication manager of Reforest project on agroforestry. And she said, as AF, I understand that AF is agroforestry, is in general relies on different sources of income. How do you think it would relate to gender? As you explained that in farms managed by women, there is diversity. Would you like to continue your research in such a direction?
So generally speaking, I think what's difficult to say, to argue on, is causality. So what the analysis that we did cannot really give information on causality, right? So I cannot clearly state because there's a woman farm manager, this and this happens, but we see relation, right? We see correlation, and we did see significant differences, and there is a clear correlation that when there is women managers on a farm, there is diversity. And again, we can take a step back and ask, why is that the case? Well, in the literature review I did, there's also some explanation where that kind of describes that women managers or women farmers tend to be pushed into more niche activities because men managers are so much expected to be the main farmer, the farmer that is responsible for managing the livestock and for managing the financial part. So this can also be kind of seen as an adaptation of women to the situation, where they kind of create more niche activities for themselves to operate in. And at the same time, I think it's a very strong finding, right? Where when there's women farm managers, we can consider that there's diversity on a worker level and on a management level, and that diversity on the worker level reflects in the diversity of activities. So I think that's a very positive and strong finding, and I think, yeah, moving forward, we can build on that and show the value that those women farm managers add to the situation. Regarding the second question, which is more personal, I think I would definitely like to continue with the gender topic in general. I think it's something that's also like a very personal interest of mine, and I think it has shaped my lived experience. So I think I will continue with that topic, definitely, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Natalie. And I think this finding of women-led farms are more diverse or receive incomes from different sources is quite interesting, and it merits a lot of research to deepen on that. I take this message home. Thank for pointing out. Then there's a last comment by Clara Diaz. She said it's a very interesting talk, although David's proposal sound appealing. As far as I am aware of many of the groups related to case studies in Re-Livestock, they do not have both genders represented. Do we have a gender bias then?
I'd love to answer that.
Yes.
Yes, there are gender biases everywhere in society, and it's normal. And it's not about pointing at people and saying, look, you have a gender biases. I mean, what we have seen in the data set that we compared to the Eurostat is saying, well, there is a gender bias in agriculture, there's a gender bias in general in science, we know that. But actually, in the data we looked at, there was less of a gender bias than in the average of Europe. And I mean, that's suggesting a little bit that innovative farmers also tend to have more women-led farms. So yes, we have a gender bias, it's like everywhere, and I don't think it's a problem. And it's it's a problem. No, it's not a problem. We need to learn how to handle them. And agriculture has a lot of biases. And this is also the reason why I was saying, I don't know how I want to bring this back to those case studies, because I don't want anyone to feel bad about this. This is just about learning how bad it is. And learning for us, for example, if you want to do something about animal health, well, if there is a woman on farm, it's probably the woman that will take the decision. So maybe we should adapt our communication so that we talk to the women rather than pointing at people or gender biases. I think that's very, very important. And this is why I would be very careful on how we go back to the case studies with these results.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thanks, Catherine, and that links with a reflection or a question I wanted to pose to you. Is well, Re-Livestock and many animal scientists are working with an object, which is an animal or an organ inside an animal or genes or whatever, and you have shown us a continuum of gender mainstreaming or gender approach into livestock science. How this more biological related research can take into account or mainstream gender into the research, most of all into the recommendations and result communication.
And I think this comes back to this very first place where we never ask the right question. And even I say we, because I myself in my research make the same mistake, is when we define the research question, did we actually ask who is affected? So when we are breeding for a specific trait in livestock, is that for the benefit of all? Did we actually ask men and women and all these different groups if this is really the priority we should follow? Is the question. And that was we do a lot of gender blind research because this question should have been asked even before the project. And so this is something we cannot catch up while the project is running. And this is why we focused on where we could, and that was the other questions we highlighted in yellow. But there is a gender dimension in all the research we do, from a genetician to a breeder to a social scientist, and in social science a bit more than in the others, when it comes to this research question and framing.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's also something we need to take with us as we move on to next projects, is to ask that question at the right moment. Putting on these glasses at the right moment means for many of our scientists to put them on before writing the proposal and not once the project is running.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's the moment when we make questions, when we should start thinking on that.
Yes.
And in any case, I really appreciate what you have done with this data, which were not intended to produce a gender case study, I guess, but I think that you have really done something very relevant with this data. I think the effort has been big, and it can be an example for many other projects to start thinking more and integrating gender approach into research. I think someone wanted to ask a last question. No? So
Clara said when we did it, okay, because we tried to force gender balance in ours. Okay, that's really about how do you get all gender represented in the case studies. Yeah, I mean, I think as a conclusion, I really would say put on the gender glasses at the right moment is the important thing, and the right moment is not per se during the project, but even before. And the gender task force is trying to help people to put on the glasses at the right moment for those topics where it's still feasible to change something. Something at the right moment. And we have tried this, and we have learned that there's a lot of potential to even be better than what we did until now.
okay. So I don't know if you want to do some final remarks, or it has been done by you. I think it's clear, and I think the Re-Livestock Gender Task Force will continue working. Thanks very much. It has been a very nice afternoon with a very nice presentation and dialogue and reflections, and we take some messages to home. And just we invite you to visit the Re-Livestock website, and if nothing nothing is against us, we will publish the video of this webinar very soon in that website. So nothing more. Thank you very much. We will continue doing Re-Livestock webinar in different topics, and if you have, of course, more occasions to share your results or your ideas in gender of the Gender Task Force, we are open to offer more webinars in this sense, in this line. Okay. Okay. So thank you very much. Bye bye, and see you in the next occasion.
And thanks to everyone for joining.